Dale, thank you so much for joining me today and talking with us on Alberta Impact.
Great to join you, and thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So you guys have had, I can only imagine what you guys have had to go through as the Police Services of Edmonton between COVID and just this wave of things. So, I mean, my first question, which I'd like to ask all of our guests, is just how are you doing? I mean, you've had to go through this whole wave. How are you doing?
Yeah, we're hanging in there, doing okay. It's I think it's just like anybody, everybody gets tired, but this isn't a time to be tired. This is a time to lead, right? Mm-hmm. And pretty fortunate to have a lot of good young men and women, old men and women too, considering myself now, that are pushing through and remaining professional. And you're right, it's been difficult times, and it's been difficult times on our communities as well. We've been basically locked up for a little over 2 years, and we've had major events that have happened in there that just feed the crisis. And certainly now, you turn on the TV or you look on the internet, you got a war going on, and who would have thought in 2022 we'd be in this state? The world's a bit upside down, but it's certainly for what's happening, we're managing and managing even to be successful in a lot of cases, but certainly there's a lot coming at us right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, we're going to get into some of those. There's some incredible things you guys are doing, actually, just in regards to community and technology, and we're going to get into some of that. How's the morale, and how do you keep that kind of up when people are tired, like you just say? You got a lot of bodies underneath your shoulders, and
yeah,
how do you keep them all going, and how do you keep a positive attitude towards those guys?
Well, you take the wins when you can get them, right? Mm-hmm. And I have to say they've been extremely professional. Doesn't mean we haven't made our share of mistakes. I think any organizations as large and been under the stress and duress that we have, that there isn't going to be mistakes, but you asked those individuals who make mistakes, they own their mistakes, and we move on. And for those that don't, we have an accountability and discipline process. But I think the biggest thing is we've been investing in is, our reintegration program, our mental wellness, making sure that we have enough supports in place for when our staff actually need it. And different things trigger different people, right? So we've really did a good job as a police service and as an employer, and large part in due to our people with our reintegration and our wellness programs to ensure that they're part of our fiber. So that's something as the chief you're extremely proud of, and it really boils down to being proud of your people, because it's people looking after people. And then we have some obviously connections to psychologists and professional help that we need it when we need it. And right now it's it's kind of like that sports team. You just got to try to keep them as healthy as you can during difficult times. And it's a credit to the makeup of each and every one of them that we've managed to keep going and put our best foot forward. So that part makes me pretty proud.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Did you find that COVID, did it bring more problems out, or was it busier for you guys? How did that work out for you?
Yeah, different things in different ways. So certain parts of crimes, though, so for the stores were shut down. Certainly your shoplifting, some of your minor things go down. But then when you have people isolated, things that start to flare up, domestic violence, which has long been a problem, and certainly in our city and many other cities too, you see some of the that really pick up. Some of the child abuse stats start to trend upwards. And those are really things that are pretty sad, actually. But sometimes when idle hands and people are too much time together and realize some don't like each other, and then there's other things around that too. So it's pockets. I think we've seen some good things slowed down because of COVID, but there's some trends that go up, and the latest trend that we're seeing is some of the violence, and in particular the firearms, and not maybe 100% directly related to COVID, but if you add, when you're agitated because of COVID and you add, say, something like meth that you're using and you have a firearm in your hand, it's generally not a good outcome. And then when you take in gangs and some of the organized component and we're fighting over drugs, again, it's not a good outcome, and those are things that disrupt your city. So we've invested heavily in that part too, to try to get ahead of that. We're even reviewing again what more we can put in that, and at the same time, you're the ones that are responsible for trying to, the vulnerable population that are being preyed on and struggling, trying to get them out of the justice system at the same time. So, yeah, it's been an interesting time. It's time like it's never been faced. And I mean, you see it all over the place, right? You see, see the docs and the nurses overwhelmed. You see the EMS overwhelmed. And it's just, we've never been through something like that. It seems like the only experts in this whole domain are the ones that never had to make a decision. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting times for sure.
And that's a scary thought sometimes
Yeah.
when you start really putting that into perspective.
Yeah.
Are you guys expecting to see, as things open up and activity starts to be more, the bars are getting more active, restaurants getting more active? I'm sure you guys are expecting to see things ramp up. How are you guys feeling preparedness-wise? I mean, there's been so much talk with, there's the whole defund the police thing. There's the whole, we've got to reduce this. But as things start to ramp up, it sounds and feels like there's going to be more of a need.
Well, you mentioned an interesting thing, and let's just start with that defund the police. So the whole defund the police, which, as you're aware, started in the U.S. I belong to the major city chiefs, so I'm talking to a lot of the major city chiefs on a regular basis. Matter of fact, I have meetings next week. And every one of those cities that defunded are pouring more money back into police than they ever have, but they've lost a lot of ground.
Yeah,
they've lost recruiting. They've lost some of their neighborhoods that were struggling, because people didn't want them in those neighborhoods, or so they thought, until it got really bad. And all that momentum and that whole thing about thinking this is a money issue, that's never worked. And I've had a few different jobs to look at different money. That's never worked. So I think that has absolutely started to spill out into parts of Canada, certainly in Edmonton as well. And we actually brought in Dr. Kevin Cameron. He's a lot of specialties, psychologists, specialize in the active shooter program. He's been involved in teaching and right across the world, actually. And, we forecast some of the things that were going to come out. That was actually part of what we put in our budget when we went forward for our fourth year of our budget. Is this was forecast, and we forecast the problem areas of where we might see this play out in our city. And I wish I could say we were wrong, but it's pretty much bang on. So sometimes a lot of this stuff is predictable, and you try to obviously put resources in place, which have been a bit of a struggle for us based on the last budget here. But we're working with what we have to try to get this, and some of the recent shootings that we've seen and some of the violence, those are causes for concern for us, and it's exactly pretty much mostly in the areas that we predicted it might happen. So there will be an increase, and and we need to get on top of it. We need to do what we can with what we have to be on top of it, and because it's about our citizens and it's about our city. So we're going to certainly put our best foot forward.
You and I talk quite a bit off camera, and I think people underestimate one thing I realize in our discussions is that a lot of police work is preventative work, where you're getting ahead of the problem. So if you're catching somebody in an early stage of going down the wrong path, you can kind of get them kind of guided to the right thing or to the right sources, and it becomes preventative. Yeah. I feel like, just from what your comments were just now, if you start to do the defunding and like you said, those other forces have lost a lot of ground because they weren't there to catch some early stage stuff that escalated because that wasn't handled.
That's right.
Again, being proactive as opposed to reactive, I think it can be arguably a pretty big part of your guys' job as well.
Well, and I probably would say, and humbly, and mostly because of our people, we're probably leading the country, if not North America and many other areas on that. We reinvested $38 million of our budget into community safety and well-being, which is, think about it like this: what can we move upstream to take homicide, investigative services, gangs, and our backstream out of business? We'll never take out of business, but can we get 20% of it? So if you don't stop a feeder system of what's coming into the system, and you only work on the back end, the back end always gets filled by somebody filling the void. So we made a conscious choice to do that. And they built things like a help team, which are police and crisis workers working together. And for a long time, policing was seen as, we measured how fast we get to a call, how quick we get there, and call times matter. But in less serious call times, not sure if you want to have the safest city in Canada that you would measure an average response time, because that really doesn't matter. The average and best don't go together, right? So on those priority one calls, somebody's at danger of life, it's a violence, it's serious, people need help immediately. I want to know every one of them that we were there the fastest we could be, not an average time. What could we have done to be faster to get to those calls? And then from there, if you think of it from a help team and going upstream, how do we stop that person that maybe needed the help at the time calling us the 2nd, the 5th, the 20th, the 50th, the 100th call? Is that's where you start to take out the feeder system by getting them the supports they need for what they're struggling with to do it. So our conscious decision is we need to be in both of these spaces because we take these calls anyway, and we need the right partners here. So hiring social workers to work along with us. Sometimes we lead when it's not safe, and often they lead, but they do the relentless follow-up. We have police and crisis workers in a police car. Ideally, we need an investment to put mental health workers in our dispatch center. What can we triage right on the phone, on the call? So that's where we're trying to go. Those are things that we're, looking to. How do we budget to do that? Which, again, back to that, we'll try again next time. But those are the things that take out of the system, and then while you equally invest the youth program that we have in relation to that, deal with youth. There's a big debate, and I can't wait to hopefully the school report comes out on school resource officers and whether we should be there or not. And some say we should, and some say we should. I actually had some study done with that when I co-chaired StatsCan, and that's what I'm interested to see what that'll come out when the schools actually review that, because we gave them all the information. But the whole premise about that is that we can build a relationship with youth and we can keep them out of the criminal justice system. But that's success. It's not success if we have to put them in the criminal justice system. And I think people are confusing that, right? Yes. So my aha moment is when I was in charge of corrections, policing and corrections, and one of the things that we looked at is, and this is evidence in science. So when you mix low risk people, offenders, with high risk offenders, and you put them in a jailed setting, they all become high risk. All of them, not part of them. So if you think of it how do we keep the low risk out of jail and get them the supports and maybe get them out of the system first? And then you can focus on the high risk, because let's face it, there's a group that, you're seeing it now. They're shooting guns at each other. They're the drug pushing it's going on. Some of them need to go to jail, and honestly, they need to be rehabilitated in jail, and they shouldn't get out till they get rehabilitated because they chose to harm members of our community. Yeah. And differentiating that through a system that focuses on both ends really allows you to. I like to think of it this way. It's a bit different, and this is a changing environment of policing. But I see policing as an extension of the community and not an arm of the state. And when you think of it as that, then you basically put that balance back into it, that you need to not only be, some call it hard on crime, arrest and incarcerate, some call it soft on crime, hugs and second chances. It's really about being smart on community safety and well-being. You need to do both. Yeah. And you need to do them both well. Mm-hmm. And in when it's the right perspective, when you can take on a lesser role because the other area is there to let you take on a lesser role, then they take on the main role. That's the ability. Unbalanced. That's the ability of team. Yeah. Yeah. And everybody looks at, we need to move money from A to B. Well, when we did, we've studied this. I've studied this multiple times. Social services, for instance, was funded 4 to 7 times from policing as it is. Yeah. And we use social workers, and I have a lot of respect for social work. But it's not about sending them to these calls when it's not safe. It's about how do you use the collective pot to build teams to make sure you get the right service on the first instance to the person in need, to connect them, and then who does the relentless follow-up. Yeah. It just needs a bit of a shake-up in the system. Yeah. And it is fixable. It's not fixable overnight, but when I got to the police service, one of the things that everybody asked me, I said, what's your goal, Chief, for the next 3 years? well, let's reduce crime by 20%. And people said, why 20%? Well, I basically said, why not? Can't be 5 because that could be weather. 10 is, okay, maybe you got lucky in a few things, but if you get a 20% reduction,
you've done something.
You've done something.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's pretty much where we are. That's pretty much what we achieved. 17, 18, 21, right across the board. Now, the point is when you stop the momentum and change course, and a large part of it is deploying your resources appropriately, now we're going to see it we have seen it in the first quarter starting to climb back up. And it's really climbing back up in the areas that are most vulnerable right now in our city.
Right. You hit so many things in there that I want to talk about now. Okay, so I mean, let's go back to, you talked about some technology you guys are using to speed things up, your response times, but also just I know that we've talked about some effectiveness with the technology in the field. Your rapid DNA setup. You've got some incubators that you worked on. Let's start there, and then we'll get into some of the partnerships.
Sure.
So I think one of the big things here is you guys have the enterprise ecosystem, which is the incubator where you've partnered with a variety of groups like AMI, ATB. There's a number of them now. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, it's the first are we talking North America?
So we have 2 accelerators.
Okay.
And the one that you're talking about was the first one. And both accelerators for a police service or to deal with the economy or the social issues are the first probably in the world. The first accelerator was the Community Solutions Accelerator, which we put together, which was a group led by our foundation and our chair, Chief Maji, him and I getting together to talk about how do we take stuff out of the system. We don't always have to investigate a crime as per se. How do we focus on some of those long-standing problems to make a difference? And so this particular one was a partnership between Motorola, ATB Financial, TELUS, University of Alberta, and AMI, and of course led by the foundation and the police service as a partner. And so there's one challenge going on right now using tech led by Motorola to, when you're dealing with individuals that are vulnerable and perhaps homeless, what is it that they actually need through technology? What is it that they need to find what they need? So they're working on with a group of stakeholders and a group of lived experience to figure out what that is. That's ongoing. But the first project that went through there is we said, let's try the liquor stores. The liquor store, because at the time we had between 9,600 and 9,700 liquor store thefts and robberies, because both were in that category. And that's in 1 year. So, we looked at a multiple dimension approach. We put out a challenge. That challenge and we signed a sergeant, Ben Davis, who's done some incredible work, and we're still working to try to move this in the province because I think this is something we need to move right across the board, based not on harming business, but reducing victimization. And honestly, it'd probably be, because it's only like $2,500 now to put the scanners in, and it's probably cheaper just to buy them, the scanners, and save on the reduction to the hospital bills and the trauma bills, right? And maybe it's a tax incentive, but that's immaterial. But the point is it came in threefold. So the scanner ID system was one. Manitoba had done that and had a significant reduction. And the other one on the challenge was what was happening with liquor store thefts and robberies. There was 2 cohorts. There was the cohort who was stealing to support their habit, which was actually the lesser one. And then there was the organized crime component that was stealing, using it as cash, selling it to illegitimate business or to legitimate business through illegitimate means. And that's really, so they'd come in and they'd steal thousands of dollars, and it'd just be swarming. And a lot of these things were violence. Firearms pulled, pepper spray pulled, knives pulled. And I mean, keep in mind, the people working in these liquor stores, they could be our grandparents, our parents, our daughters, and our sons. And that's really what they are.
The least violent people you'll ever meet.
That's exactly right. So with that said, is those store, and Alcanna put up $500,000 to basically make this happen. And they invested it to be on the preventive end to try to reduce the victimization for the people that work for them, which was, I just thought, such a courageous move and a great move. So the stores as the cohort that had all things in them. So the patron scan, the scanner ID, and then the other one was a marketing strategy to obviously ensure that we're looking at reducing the amount of this activity, right? Those particular 5 stores in Edmonton, I think there's 2 in Calgary. In Edmonton, those stores had a 94% reduction.
Wow.
Now, think of that calls for service, 94% reduction. Think if in 9,700 of those, if every one of them had the same one and had those 3 things in, which aren't real costly.
Yeah.
If we had a 97% reduction in that, the victimization that would go down, being able to focus resources others, freeing up officer time.
Yes.
And still connecting the vulnerable population that are doing it, because we have that help team now and everybody else. So we don't just leave them, we fit them in. Where this really came to a head as a project was it was weird, because we would investigate the heck out of these things. Like, we would have people, project teams, and we'd work, because it's chronic, right? And I still remember it was early on, one particular individual had 35 of them. This individual was connected to the organized component. There were some of them that were violent, some of them were just theft. The individual was charged and went to court. And this particular individual got out with one condition. Want to guess what that was? Don't go to the liquor store. So it's just so happened I was speaking at a judges conference, just a little bit of humor, because it's not anybody's fault. And it was just, I was talking about this, and I said, a couple of judges got to know, and I basically was just speaking at a meeting, and I said, did you guys maybe not think we might have thought of that? But that's the point, right? Is we get entrenched into a system. You look at an individual, you might not know the full story, or perhaps we didn't put the full story there. Yeah. It's treated as a theft under. It's actually very organized and components, so the whole system spins it. And really what you've created is a cash commodity that nobody can trace. So you got to deal with it differently. So the dealing with it differently, let's just stop it from happening. The next one we want to work on is catalytic converters and a big one. And auto theft. Yeah. The citizens of Edmonton are losing millions and millions and millions of dollars on this stuff. Yeah. And right now we have a real safe mechanism. If we have Air 1 up right now, we can do it in a safe manner. Some of these things are just ridiculous, what goes on, and people just take off. Yeah. We're trying to lobby the province to have an ability to even seize vehicles 55 kilometers over. There's so many over 55 kilometers over. But the point of this whole thing is if we can stop some of this thing from happening, whether somebody out there in the world that can invent something through an accelerator to do it, or can make a catalytic converter theft proof, because it's a commodity it's high cash value, right? Yeah. It's not traceable. So we got to look at it the other day to figure out, or the other way to figure out how we do it. Now the accelerator, which is the second solution, second accelerator, which is the Community Safety Wellness Accelerator. That's where Alchemist is part of. Alchemist is at Silicon Valley. They're one of the largest accelerators in the world. They have brought staff here to work with our foundation and some of our people to Edmonton. And so that is looking at things like mental health apps. That is looking at things like housing, homeless, domestic violence. Domestic violence is another issue that we have approximately 9,700, very similar to what the liquor store thefts and robberies were.
I wonder if those two correlate. A guy gets drinking.
There probably could.
There's got to be some there's crossing.
I don't think you'd be too far off on some of them.
Right?
Yeah, maybe not the theft part, but definitely the alcohol part.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, looking at it differently, using different ways. And honestly, bringing some of the innovation in our business community. Like the one thing about Alberta, we're innovative as heck. So if you think of an accelerator in a different world, just a different way, just before I leave it, is think about how we innovated in oil and gas. Yeah. Think about how we innovated in agriculture. Bigger yields for less, right?
We're doing it in healthcare now.
Healthcare.
We're solving problems left, right, and center.
Think of how we did it in mining.
Yeah.
Think of how we did it in tech. Think of how we did it in tech. Yeah. What if we did that into the social aspect.
Right.
And here's why the social aspect is so big. So when I was in my last job as deputy minister, I had the transformational change file, but I also co-chaired the federal, provincial, territorial deputy ministers of justice. And it was interesting because we did a bit of a kind of an analogy on what provinces spend on the social systems. And we boil it down to, some of them are a little bit different, what they call the ministries, but if you kind of put them together, what looks alike, seems to be alike. The 6 ministries of health, social services, education, justice, the employment arm of the economy, and the universities, we're spending between 80 and 89% of every provincial budget. And those are the systems. Yet we haven't looked at innovation. Those same ministries still operate the way they did 50 years ago in relation to their responsibilities.
Gotcha.
Where if you look at tech and you look at ag and stuff, it's like this.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, everybody talks about silos. Well, the way you break a silo is you change the structure and you make it more conducive to what drives the work. So there's so many things that we're on the verge of. We just got to obviously try to get through some of this and get some of the momentum back that we've lost.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I don't think some of the things that we do are well understood, and I guess maybe we can take that upon ourselves. But at the same time, is our crime stats, how they've tied into the things we've done for the last 3 years have been really good. Like for the first time ever, at least in 20 years is what we think we can track closest. We dropped below the national Canadian violence level, and we've been the second or third worst city in the country for years. We've closed the gap on the Alberta gap. We've closed the gap on the Canada gap, on private property crime, overall crime, everything. Now the problem is first quarter, and here we are, and we didn't take on the next segment. And the next segment is we need to do something different in downtown. We need to do something different in Chinese business community. We need to do something different in 118 with Alberta Ave. And we need to do something different in the LRT. Right. Because those are those risky points that were identified when we first did it. Now, hopefully we can hold on between us and the city and others making the efforts and not lose all the momentum. But is it a concern right now? Yeah, and it's a real concern, the number of firearms that we're starting to see on our street. If you remember back in the day, and I'm not sure because you mentioned you were listening to some of the things that I had said earlier, remember there was a big concern when people were going out and buying guns like crazy? A lot of those guns, now can't say it's those guns because you don't blame people. Right. Guns, it's banning guns isn't going to be it. How about we focus on the people, right? It's the people that pull the trigger. What's changed now is we got a lot of people that are pulling triggers.
And that's such an interesting, thought, and it's a very controversial thought, and I've seen T-shirts and stuff where it says, guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? And that's it is a controversial thought. I mean, in the States, every time that an incident happens, they go in and they start talking about eliminating the firearms and so on and so forth. And some of them maybe, they should be eliminated. Nobody needs them unless they're actually going someplace that's crazy. But that's one thing I've always thought about is how do you, again, you talk about, we know, you said it yourself. We go into the social. We look at how people are getting recycled into the system. We proactively look at problems that are starting to arise, and we have to get those people the help that they need before it escalates to that spot. I think where you're going with the guns piece, lots of people bought firearms. They thought that the world was going to end, 2 years ago when COVID hit, and people kind of went. Then most of those people probably were just maybe watched a movie or two too many and got these ideas in their heads. So what do we do to, work around that? Well,
and that's safe storage, right? But I think most people, like, just to be clear, I it's the focus on the people because it's without the person, the gun doesn't go off, right? And, now those people that use the guns are looking to gain access any way they can, right? Some are going to get them, depending on what they want to be involved in, come up through the U.S. Some obviously are going to do it through B&E. Some are going to do it through straw purchasing. There's always a way to get a gun. Yeah. But we have a very similar thing that's equally is when we get commodity focused. So we focus on a commodity. Give you an example is, we got a serious overdose problem going on. It's crisis level right across the country and North America, really. More so prominent on the west and the east, but it's certainly spreading. But, most of that is fentanyl, some car fentanyl. And, fentanyl, so we get a fentanyl strategy, right? The federal government wants to deal with that through a fentanyl strategy. There was the old one. Marijuana was the ticket. We need to legalize marijuana. We're going to focus on marijuana, legalize it. And really all that happened there is cheesy sales went up. And then we have this drug in the middle, this meth, that's, makes okay people do not okay things in a lot of cases because it's really mind altering and you put that in a combination. But what we don't need is a meth strategy because you know what happens when you get into those states? A lot of those people are using all three of those drugs.
Right.
And guess what? There's going to be another drug. So the whole point of focusing on recovery and focusing on the people and the intervention of the people, and this is a big debate going across the country right now. Everybody talks about decriminalization. I gave evidence on safe supply here just recently to the government and having been around. We need facilities and treatment rather than changes in legislation. We very seldom actually lay a possession charge unless it's attributed to something else. Matter of fact, there's a prosecutor directive saying they won't prosecute it. Oh, wow. So that isn't going to change anything.
Yeah.
Safe supply, these are cartels that are in this business. Right. They maneuver and they manipulate and they change and they adjust. And so what we've said as AACP, the Alberta Association of Chiefs of Police, and certainly at the Edmonton Police is focus on treatment. We need some intervention. We need some prevention. Yes, we need some medical treatment. We need some enforcement. And some of that is going to be, yes, safe consumption. But you need a continuum of services, just like you need a continuum of housing. If you think you can take somebody from the street that maybe is not ready for a house and put them in a house, probably a good chance something not good is going to happen, right? So we're just missing that system connection in a large part. We're not the only city, but I think certainly it's predominantly shows up here, and and a lot of that stuff, if left unchecked, ends up in the criminal justice system, and that's not where we can solve it either. We need to do both. Yeah, get the people out, but focus on the people that should be in the justice system.
Yeah, and a really close look at the reality. Like you talk about putting those people in a housing system, like the reality of that, even just common sense should theoretically dictate that a person that's on drugs gets something like that, like a home. Chances are, like they're going to burn that home down. It's not going to be. It's not pretty. It's not safe. So that's you talk a lot about the collaboration and trying to get into, if you're going to put them in a home, they need those services there. It's about the people. They need to be taken care of.
Yeah, and just it's kind of funny because I hate that word collaboration. I love the word. And I'll just tell you why. Yeah. Like I think of collaboration is it's like bacon and eggs for breakfast. The chicken, he was the collaborator. The pig, he was the partner. He was committed, right? And
you like partnership. That's the one you want. That's right.
Because partnerships win and lose together. We don't point fingers at each other. If one messes up, you sit back, you realize if it's a team, and we focus on partnerships, we get MOUs, we all come at it from a different angle, and we get decision makers at a table. We should be able to get 20% of the system. Mm-hmm. But to think we're going to get to utopia and stop this in 30 days, 90 days, 3 years. Because if you talk housing, there's a group of people that don't want to be housed, right? Yeah. But there's no reason that we can't get decision makers together and say, let's get 20% out of the system in 1 year. I remember when we studied this 20% of the social system and when we did the money in the system with Alina Turner, Dr. Turner, 20%, I think, if I remember it right, was right about $1.2 billion worth of potential reinvestment. And that's just for the city of Edmonton. So
just the city of Edmonton.
Just the city of Edmonton.
I think it was like $7.5 billion.
Right. But just doing things different. Focus on getting 20%. It was very similar when we studied this in Saskatchewan, and we did a similar approach. Is sometimes we just think the solution is more of what we have. And if you ever brought in really, really bright people and said, if you're designing it from today, what would it look like? It changes the way you put your mind to it. Now, the question is, you can't just change it overnight. But if this is where we're trying to get to, and this is where we are, what incremental investments or diversions or deferred services can we start to put into other areas to get us there and have a plan? Mm-hmm. Sky's the limit in this stuff. I've been pretty fortunate. I've been all over the world. I spoke at the World Health Conference in Mexico City and the OECD and Paris to London a couple times to most U.S. states and certainly every Canadian city. So I've got to learn from pretty smart people and got to participate with some pretty smart people and been fortunate to be exposed to that. And I just think sometimes that if we put half of the innovation effort into the social system as we do into the economy, really we get a better net economy. And because I'm a business guy, to me, I always ask the question, do you want a $500 million business that loses $100 million, or do you want a $5 million business that makes $1 million? If we talk net,
no-brainer on that one.
If we talk net numbers, though, this all changes.
Yeah. Well, and you've had a really unique perspective too, being able to see all these different places in the world and take, okay, this is working over there. Yeah. We got to take that back home and implement that here. And that's not working. Well, it looks like that's what we're doing. We got to oust that at some point. And you're right, it does take time. But I think with these partnerships that you're making, with these coalitions and these incubators, the technologies you guys are adapting and adopting, will help speed it up and get you there. We always talk about time to between the time of a crime and solving a crime. You guys are speeding that up with technology as well, between your rapid firearms testing, your rapid DNA testing. You guys now have the facial recognition that you guys are pushing. Those are all huge things. Yeah. And it's amazing that you can look towards technology to solve a lot of the problems that you guys are having. Yeah,
and all of those have had a lot of success. Certainly the rapid DNA, I think we're still the only police service in the country that's doing it, but there are others now going there based on what we've managed to do it. And Superintendent Devin LaForce, who's actually in charge of our Accelerator now, and certainly our from our perspective of the service is, so rapid DNA can tell you at one point going to a homicide, there's blood in a glove. I'm just going to give you an example. Blood in a glove, these little swabs that we'd have to take that glove, send it to the lab, sometimes take months, depending on the prioritization, the case backload, et cetera, to do it. It could take quite some time, and usually several months. Rapid DNA goes and gives a swab of the blood. You can actually take that test and it'll give you a profile based on the comparative with the lab, and you'll have that in minutes. Yeah. So now you got to investigate a lead. You got enough there to make an arrest, take a statement, do everything. You still got to go and take that to validate it, send it to the lab for validation. But you at least have enough based on a medical device and science to actually proceed. So
you can keep working. It's not stalled.
And you might stop another homicide.
Exactly.
You might.
Good point.
You might stop, something else.
Right.
And you get some peace of mind that you get somebody that's potentially done something violent in custody with enough evidence to actually, continue to work on the file. So it's been really, really good.
Awesome.
In relation to the firearms, the IBIS system, we've examined, I think it's 726 firearms, somewhere in that neighborhood, and there's about 500 and some that have come back through the IBIS hit, and getting us to 42 IBIS hits. So what IBIS is, it's a system where you can test fire your gun. The hammer of the gun leaves a distinct profile on the bullet or the shell casing. Mm-hmm. So that particular shell casing can go back to the U.S. The firearm, alcohol, firearm, tobacco group that tracks us across the world, but certainly they've worked with us to help set this system up. So, I'll give you an example. We had a shooting not that long ago where it could be traced that. The gun came out of the States, went up through Toronto, was associated, I think it was Toronto or somewhere in Ontario, so I won't say Toronto for sure, associated potentially potentially 4 there, and shootings, and then associated to our shooting. So all of a sudden, you've got a track, and if this, you can't say it's the same individual, but it's the same gun, right?
Yeah.
And there's a good chance that maybe it's the same, but you got leads to follow on all different
At
investigations.
least you know what direction you're going in.
And the interesting part is, if it is the same person, which, time will tell if it ever was, or, if you've done 5 shootings, there's a good chance you're not stopping at 5, right? So you might be preventing future shootings, but you're also doing this a lot quicker. You're getting people in custody, et cetera. The other one that we never spoke about that was really instrumental here recently in one of our other shootings was, Air One and the infrared cameras. In Air One, picking up the shooting and people throwing stuff out of the vehicles, and now we've got guns and we've got phones and we got the whole profile, and we got those individuals within minutes, hours to arrest, which would have been tons and tons of time. So investments like that and how they work on high-speed chases and major things that be going on, these are investments that you invest in to work smarter, to avoid conflict, but also to in a large city to keep a lot of these things in a better place. And then the last one you mentioned was facial rec. So facial rec, I'll give you a bit of an example. One of those bad assault takes place. There's a picture of a video that the business, let's use it as a business, has this picture of this individual. Now that we now have that picture, we can compare that through facial recognition to the database that we have in our files, of previous offenders, and what Calgary has. So in a very short period of time, we can actually, and I think I think I had the stats here at some point, what we actually have had. We've had 500 requests since January 22, 169 investigative leads, and we're 50 to 5 to 60 leads a month.
Holy jeez.
And just think how that actually can get ahead of this and get some of these people back to the people that maybe need to be in jail. That's how this stuff happens. And the good part of it is you're only using it against your database, so it's all protected. It's but unfortunately, a lot of our criminal element doesn't just do one thing. So they're in our database for a reason, right? So big successes, shortening time investigations, great investigative aids, all of them, and certainly lets us go after them in a lot more effective and efficient and a lot quicker manner than we have in the past.
Even accuracy, right?
And accuracy.
Like just being able to be accurate.
100%.
And
100%.
Man, I know we could sit here all day and talk. I'm sure of it. There is so much you guys are doing right now. We've talked a lot about some challenges you guys have had, some wins you guys are doing, some areas of opportunity. So I want to thank you again for coming in and talking to us today. This was super awesome to hear all of these things that are happening, and best of luck into the future here. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to see that things are looking better. I know that you guys still have some challenges, but things are looking better. And you've said it in some of your past speeches. We can't slow down. We got to keep this momentum going, keep working together, keep building these partnerships, and we'll get there. So.
Yeah, losing's not an option. It's about our kids and grandkids, right? And it's about our citizens. And honest to goodness, I can say, as somebody that came in 2019, originally from St. Albert, but coming into this police service, this is a really good police service, and we've done some pretty good stuff. And hey, we've made some mistakes, and we've owned some of our mistakes, and we've had some accountability things that we've dealt with as well. But there's a lot of good men and women in this police service, and as a CEO or as a chief, it brings you a lot of pride to work. But the sky's the limit. We just need to be able to let people do our job. Let us do our job.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.